Welcome, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on from where you are joining us today. We are very glad to have the second leg of Dewey Global Dialogue, which we started last year. And today we are very fortunate to have with us as the guest speaker, former President of Austria, President Fischer. And he doesn't require any introduction, and he has a truly illustrious political and public career as the President of Austria for 12 years. And before that, he was the Speaker of the Austrian Parliament for another 12 years. And since his retirement, he is now serving as the co-chair of the board of the Dewey Centre Global Citizens. And he is one of the truly respected elder statesmen in Europe and the world. So thank you so much for finding time to share your insights and experience today. Thank you again, Mr. President, for joining us today. And before I give the floor to President Fischer, I'd like to first invite Eric Yuan, CEO of Dewey Centre China, the co-host of today's event, to make a few words of welcoming remarks. So floor is yours, Eric, first.
Thank you, Ambassador King. Dear President Fischer, Ambassador King, Monica, and all young fellows, good morning and good afternoon. My name is Eric Yuan. I'm the president for Dewey China Center. Thank you all for joining the second Dewey Global Dialogue, which in partnership with Ban Ki-moon Center. I especially thank President Fischer and Ambassador King and Monica for your participation. In our Beijing end, we also have Director Wang Kai from China Foreign Publishing Administration and a group of young elites from China leading Chinese universities in our Dewey Centre China building. Dewey Centre is an independent, non-partisan international education platform named after world-renowned educator John Dewey. We aim to promote STEAM education, quality education, and global young leaders' engagement for a better sustainable world. Tomorrow is this year's World Earth Day. Climate change is no longer the political debating topic, but a serious natural science fact that all human beings has to face. How to let new generation, especially Generation Z, to better understand the effect of climate change to our living. It is the common topic we're going to discuss today, but we're going to discuss for the next decades. So I will not take too long time for today's opening remark, and then we'll give floor to President Fischer to share his thoughts on the green initiatives, climate change, the young engagements internationally, and his thoughts on SDG. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for your welcoming remarks. As you said, today's event very timely because it is being held on the eve of the Global Earth Hour campaign to put a spotlight on the urgency and seriousness of the global sustainability crisis, including climate change, facing the humanity, and the urgency of the action we have to take together. So now I'd like to invite President Fischer to give his presentation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation. And I will try my best to say and give my opinion on the subject, in particular SDGs, and the duties and chances of the younger generation, and in particular students. In my opinion, since the early times of history, every new generation has the chance and the duty to try to, I quote, restore our Earth and to make our future safer and more sustainable, end of quotation. This is also your change for the years to come. The elder generation had always the chance and the duty to pass on their experience, their knowledge, and their insights to the younger generation in order to help them create a safer and more sustainable future. This is exactly what we should try together. I was born in Austria in 1938, and I have many memories about the end of World War II and memories about the difficult years to rebuild Europe and Austria after the war. I have memories about the 10 years of Soviet, American, French, and British occupation in Austria after the war, about the Vietnam War and the Cultural Revolution in China, which I visited for the first time in 1974. Memories about the frightening dangers of the Cold War period and about the first steps of European integration. And now, today, several years later, through modern technologies, I have the possibility to sit in Vienna, 7,500 kilometers from Beijing, and to speak to you and discuss with you how we can make our future safer, how we can successfully implement the SDGs, and how we can pass historic experience on to the next generation. What we know from history, for instance, is that war cannot be a lasting solution for national and transnational problems. We need peace. What we have learned from scientists and experts is that our atmosphere is very sensitive. Global warming by more than 2 degrees Celsius will create global ecological destruction and damage of living conditions for human beings and all other species alike. What we also know is that global challenges can only be solved on the basis of global solutions, and that egoistic nationalism is poisoning global cooperation and peace. Dear friends, the establishment of the United Nations after the end of World War II was a great and logical and successful consequence of lessons from history. And the Human Rights Declaration from 1948, saying that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, endowed with reason and conscience, and that they should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood, is not only a lesson from history, but a historic milestone and the common ground of understanding in politics and elsewhere. All in all, we learned a lot in the second half of the 20th century, and some of our problems were settled and solved, but by far not all of them, and new problems came in addition. History is not like a soccer game, which lasts for a specific amount of time and sees a result at the end. On the contrary, history is a permanent process of solving existing problems and being confronted with new ones. One of the relatively new, but still one of the most urgent issues, if not the most urgent of our time, is climate emergency. I remember the first discussions about this problem in the so-called Club of Rome in Europe in the 60s and 70s. Long periods of pros and contras were following, but it turned out to be a fact that our economy and society is based on technologies responsible for global warming. We also know which consequences and catastrophes will occur if we don't keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. I will come back to this particular issue. Another urgent global problem existing since the early days of humanity is the unfair distribution of income and wealth, leading to extreme poverty on the one hand and extreme wealth on the other hand. This is not only unfair from an ethical point of view, but also destabilizing our societies. Several other examples could be mentioned, and it has become more and more evident that most of our global problems can only be solved on a global scale, as I have mentioned already. Dear colleagues and friends, this brings us to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations as an answer to the questions how global problems can be tackled on a global basis, and how our existing society can be transformed into a more prosperous, equal, just, and sustainable place for all. At the moment, the United Nations comprises 193 member states, and almost all of them follow a national political agenda. The SDGs are unique in a way as they represent a sort of global, international governmental program accepted by all UN member states. I remember very well the day in September 2015. It was Sunday, the 27th September in the morning, when the SDGs were on the agenda during the opening session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. As president of my country, I had the chance and the honor to deliver a short statement and demonstrate the positive approach of Austria towards the SDGs. I'm happy to see how, in the 5.5 years since their adoption, the SDGs have gained more and more attention, relevance, and success. They are a crucial part of the solution for a more secure and just world. Goal number 1, for instance, addresses the question of poverty. It reads, no poverty. These are only 2 words, but imagine what they mean for millions of people living under terrible conditions and far below the minimum for a decent life. It would not be realistic to assume that poverty as such can be totally eradicated, but successfully fighting against the current global poverty rate and reducing the current existing differences in income, wealth, and chances would be an enormous step forward and have positive consequences in many other spheres of life. Goal number 3 of the SDGs is good health and well-being. You in China, you in Korea, we in Austria, and all other our friends around the world now realize very well how fragile our health system are and how damaging diseases and pandemics can be for a country, its economy, and humanity as a whole. COVID-19 is a dramatic example and needs global cooperation. There's not enough time, and it's not my intention to elaborate on all SDGs, but as I'm addressing young people, I want to explicitly highlight goal number 5, namely gender equality. When I started working at the Austrian Parliament in the early 60s, in the office of the then Vice President of our National Assembly, the share of women in Parliament was below 7%. And not only in Austria. At that time, in Austria, there was no female minister in the government, no female governor in the country, no female ambassador, no female vice chancellor in one of our universities, etc., etc. And when I married in 1968, the Austrian family law literally stated since the early 19th century, the woman has to obey the orders of her husband and has to make sure that children and employers also obey to these orders. This law was changed in 1974, and a lot has been achieved in the meantime with regard to gender equality. But a lot still has to be done. Look, for instance, at the still existing and very relevant gender pay gap between men and women. An annual report of the European Union analyzing the yearly progress of gender equality in the Union informs us that it will take another 40 to 50 years to reach full gender equality if we continue developments at the current speed. So we need acceleration. Of particular importance is the subject I mentioned already, namely SDG goal number 13, climate action. For a long time, the problems of climate change was not really taken serious enough. And I still know politicians who are quite irresponsible on that subject matter. But a few months after adopting the SDGs in New York, namely in December 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement was approved as an instrument to keep climate warming below 2 degrees Celsius. The start was quite slow and not really promising and satisfying. But in the meantime, I hope I'm not too optimistic. In the meantime, big players in this field, as for instance, the European Union, China, the United States, without the period of President Trump, and many other countries very well understand the urgency of the matter for the future of mankind. Many attempts in climate mitigation and adaptation now go into the right direction. Whether we are fast enough and determined enough will show off in the next 20 years. And therefore, the younger generation has a special challenge in this field. Finally, I want to underline goal number 16, namely peace, justice, and strong institutions. For me, peace is an overarching goal for humanity and to achieve all the other SDGs. The former German Chancellor Willy Brandt, you probably will know his role in Europe, who was a good friend and a mentor to me, once said, I quote, "Peace is not everything, but everything is nothing without peace." And he was right and still is right. Nevertheless, the danger of war never disappeared and still exists. And war with weapons of the 21st century could be and would be totally different from earlier types of wars, including World War II. The current generation, and it means you and the next generations, are therefore crucial for defending peace. Strong institutions, also addressed in SDG 16, include, in my understanding, a functioning state, rule of law, and democracy. Democracy is based on the principle that all human beings have the same rights and the same human dignity, and that democratic decision-making is the best way to combine freedom and equality. I know that the existing democracies are not perfect, but I believe that no political system can pretend to be absolutely perfect. You know that Winston Churchill is quoted with an ironically remark, namely that democracy is not a good political system, but all other systems are even worse. So far, Churchill. Dear friends, what you, the current young generation, should do is to engage and to make sure that the dialogue and even competition between different political systems is a peaceful one, and that international law is constantly respected. We are from different nations, have different religions, speak different languages, but we are all global citizens and have only one planet and no planet B. Global citizenship is also the overarching principle of the Ban Ki-moon Center since its foundation in 2018. It was an idea and proposal of Ban Ki-moon in 2016, the last year of his term as Secretary General of the United Nations, and my last year as President of the Republic of Austria, to establish together the Ban Ki-moon Center in Vienna with an international board in order to work and advocate for the SDGs. I fully agreed to the proposal of Ban Ki-moon, and we started in 2018. We do our best to support the idea of global citizenship, to support the SDGs, and strive for the principle that no one should be left behind. Why are our 4 pillars of leadership? peace and security, advocacy and education, we empower women and youth to be innovators and agents of change for the SDGs. The Ban Ki-moon Center urges governments to implement their national SDG action plans, partners with like-minded organizations globally. It gives lectures and participates in conferences and online events, as I'm doing just now, and supports schools with their integration of SDGs and global citizenship education in their curricula. The Ban Ki-moon Center is also empowering young change makers around the world through global citizen fellowships, mentorships, and scholarships, and guides them in the implementation of the Sdg Micro Projects. These micro projects take place in their respective communities, ranging from Afghanistan, Austria, South Korea, Kuwait, Bahrain, to Rwanda, Jordan, Lebanon, Ghana, etc. About 100 of these Sdg micro projects have been implemented in the meantime and cover almost all the SDGs. You too can create an Sdg micro project by spotting a challenge in your community or region and trying to find adequate solutions. Find your passion and transform it into action for the SDGs. Dear friends, I finally want to introduce to you Mrs. Monica Furler, sitting near to me. She is not only the CEO of the Ban Ki-moon Center, but also the heart and the driving force of our center in Vienna. She's an Austrian diplomat with years of experience in international affairs and worked at the United Nations headquarters in New York, in Geneva, and in Vienna. She can give you much more details about the work of the projects of the Ban Ki-moon Center. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for inviting me. And Monica and I are looking forward to your contributions and questions, and we'll do our best to give answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your enlightening, I would say, lecture and also passionate plea for all of us, including in particular for the future generation. As you eloquently pointed out, that scientists are now sending all of us very serious warning about the danger that humanity is facing. The group of world-renowned scientists called the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists set the doomsday clock every year since 1947 as a deep reflection from what they did to contribute to Manhattan Project, which ultimately produced atomic bombs, and they very much regretted it. And then they decided to assess the danger every year, and they created fictional clock set to midnight, which means that man-made doomsday. And last year and this year, they set the clock closest to midnight, 100 seconds. And even at the peak of the Cold War, it was set to 2 minutes before the midnight. But the very reason they did it, because of the two existential threats President Fisher identified, the lingering threats of weapons of mass destruction, including the nuclear weapons, and now climate change. So they warned the humanity about the danger. But we were very slow to take action, but always it is never too late. But as global challenges require global solutions, this requires global leadership. And we very much appreciate the leadership always coming from European countries. And for that, you share the wisdom of European statesmen like Winston Churchill and Willy Brandt have taught us. But now the regional dynamics, political dynamics in Europe seem to become also very complicated. And also now, given the trend, very worrisome trend of rising tension between US and China, the world's two largest powers. And I believe the role to be played by European Union will be all the more important. And I'd like to ask you to give your assessment of the current state of affairs of political dynamics in the European Union, particularly after the Brexit, and also given the common challenges now faced by not only Europe, by the all over the world, particularly including COVID-19 pandemic, and how these changing political dynamics in the European Union will affect the global affairs vis-a-vis Europe's relationship toward both European relationship toward both the United States and China. So I'd like to first invite you to give your own assessment on that issue, although this is a little different from today's main topic, which is one planet, one future. But I think European leadership continues to be very critical in leading the world toward global solutions. So please, this will be maybe my first question as the moderator before I give the floor to Monica, as you just introduced. Thank you.
Thank you, Won-Soo. It's very kind from you that you give the first question to European affairs, where I feel at home and where my life is taking place, and where I observe the developments very careful. World War I was a great shock. And one of the reactions was to create the Völkerbund, to cooperate and to make a basis for dialogue. It was not successful. It collapsed. World War II was an even bigger shock. And it had a positive consequence to establish the United Nations worldwide and to give an impact to European integration. The question was, will the hostility and the old rivalry and competition between Germany and France be settled? And it was a success story. The European economic unity was founded, Europäische Wirtschaftsgemeinschaft, European Economic Community. Germany and France were leading members, and the first steps were a union of 6 countries. Great achievements were reached in that period. 6 leaders sitting together, discussing important questions, including Italy, including Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Germany, and France, and a lot of progress was made. Then started successfully enlargement from 6 to 9, from 9 to 12 members, from 12 to 15, from 15 to 27. And the European Union today is also something absolutely necessary. And I'm a strong supporter of the idea of European integration. And on our project is still further enlargement to 6 more countries on the Western Balkan, like Serbia and Albania and Kosovo and Northern Macedonia, etc., etc. But the problem of the European Union is that it is based on anonymity, Einstimmigkeit. How do you say? All must have the same opinion to take a decision. And that makes the European Union not very flexible, not very quick to react. And this is our main problem at the moment. We are too slow. Today, they are negotiating in Brussels on the problem of vaccination against COVID-19. What was the result? They could not agree. They said the ambassadors should continue the discussion and hopefully we'll find solutions in the next meeting. The European Union is absolutely necessary, but its weakness is that in more and more cases, they are not ready and able to take clear decisions. This is aspect to your question. COVID-19 fits into this observation. We want to cooperate in the European Union, but at the same time, every government has its own interest on top. Every prime minister promises European solidarity, but if the concrete question is whether his country should get more doses for vaccination or other countries, the mechanics of domestic policy more or less forces him to take the position as a national leader and not as a European leader. I would say that Mrs. Merkel, I admire her very much, is an exemption. She is outstanding. She is really able to say, okay, it would be in the interest of Germany to do that, but in the interest of Europe, I have another option, and then to go the European way. But not many leaders are following her example. And the third very interesting program, every week a book is published on that question, namely the relations between Europe, United States, and China. It is a fact that China is a very dynamic country, a very dynamic society with a lot of success in the political and the economic field. It is a fact that for Europe and for China, mutual relations are important and mutual relations are a great value. The third fact is that the United States, since more than 100 years, or roughly 100 years since World War I, are the leading and dominating world power from the military sense and from the economic sense. And we are now just in a period where the progress in China brings a situation that the United States cannot pretend to be the one and only one top nation with influence in all parts of the world. And therefore, the competition between the United States and China obviously is growing. And even the new President Biden is taking a hard position vis-a-vis China. And Europe has all interest on good relations between Europe and China, but on the other hand, Europe and the United States are very closely linked, and they are both in NATO, etc. Not Austria. Austria is not a member of NATO as a neutral country, but NATO and the European Union are very closely linked. So it will need a lot of wisdom and a lot of moderation and a lot of taking care on international rules and international law to organize the competition between the United States and China in a peaceful way. And if there is a long-term danger for world peace, probably the competition between United States and China is the biggest risk, and it needs statesmanship on all sides to continue peaceful relations and to continue rule of law. This a short answer, relative short answer on three important global questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Fischer. And as a Korean, I cannot agree more with your insight, because like Europe, Korea also maintains very close relationship both with the United States and China. For Korea, US is alliance partner, and also they are politically most important. But economically, China is the biggest trading partner with Korea. So I very much share your passionate and also I think a very wise appeal to the leaders of both US and China to find a way to manage their relationship. First of all, as you said, rule-based, based on the international law, international norms, and also second of all, a peaceful way. So rule-based and peaceful management of US-China relationship will be good, not only for both US and China, but also for countries like Korea and Europe, and also all around the world. And I hope your message will be heard very well by the leaders of both US and China. With that, now I'd like to give the floor to Monica, as President Fischer asked us, because Monica is the CEO of Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, who acts as the co-host of today's event, because Dewey Global Dialogue was designed in cooperation with both Dewey Center China and Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. And today is the second of such event to be followed. I hope maybe once a month, every month in the many years to come. And also, as President Fischer emphasized, Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens are doing a lot of real work for real people with the focus of women and the youth. So floor is yours, Monica, to give us your views on how we can pursue a sustainability agenda, as President Fischer has informed us. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege and pleasure to be here today, and I'm very happy to see many young faces. What we have heard from President Fischer is very much a tour de force of the last century, and it points us to where we are today. And I think it's a relevant perspective, as the many young people that are gathered here today with us will have plenty of questions about what will the future bring? How can I contribute? What shall we do to set the planet on the right track? And as President Fischer said in his remarks, we don't have a planet B, we only have a planet A, and we don't have a plan B, we only have a plan A, and that is a great plan, it is the SDGs. So I'm very curious to listen to your insights, and here I'm particularly pointing to the younger generations. It is your planet, it is your future, and we definitely want to learn from you. What we have realized in the Ban Ki-moon Center is that we are most effective if we are practicing our actions in a global citizen mindset. What does that mean? That means that we in our immediate communities are spotting a challenge that might not only be relevant for us personally, but for several members of the community. We spot that challenge. We do not only research, but we ponder about and talk to others how we can solve it, how can we find a solution, and we act upon it. And of course, you might say this is a very small fraction of global citizen mindset, because if you are looking at global leaders, like we were talking about Angela Merkel, or we were talking about now the US-Chinese relations, the very same kind of principle can be applied even at the top level. It is spotting the challenge, finding a constructive solution, and then acting upon it. So it does not really change, even if it's at the micro level or at the macro level. The mindset of doing well for humankind as such is very much the same. So we in the Ban Ki-moon Center are hoping to foster that with, as you have heard, fellowships, mentorships, and scholarships. And without much further ado, I would love to pass the floor to our young stellar changemakers and also to our Chinese friends to ask questions that you might have to Dr. Fisher or to me or to Kim Won-soo, as this is a global dialogue in which we all want to engage.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Monica, for, as you said, spotting the challenge and also reminding everybody of their responsibility. And also, as President Fisher said, although the future belongs to the young generation, but the responsibility to take action falls on the current establishment generation. So, and I think there we have a mismatch, and how we can empower young generation to act, to remind the older generation to start real action before it is too late. And that requires, first of all, awareness of the young generation, as you said, and also advocacy and also capacity building. And thank very much as CEO of Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens for engaging and empowering the young generation. And for that, with that in mind, and also following the point President Fisher emphasized for gender equality, today, I think we have all women panelists with us today. And now I'd like to first invite panelist from Chinese side, Ms. Jing Jiai. I think she's a PhD student from Tsinghua University. And I think she is very much interested in the relationship between economic growth and environmental protection. Because very often in real life, these two may come at the expense of the other. But unless we change the paradigm to make economic growth happen at the same time with environmental protection, we cannot change the paradigm. So with that, I'd like to invite Ms. Jing Jiai. Floor is yours. You can address the question mainly to President Fisher and also Monica and myself. So floor is yours.
Okay, first of all, thanks again for President Fisher's words and also the introduction from Mr. Kim Won-soo and Ms. Monica. It's really my honor to be here with you today. So I fully agree what President Fisher has said, that we young generations are now facing the new duties and challenges to build a future more safer and more sustainable. But as you have mentioned that, especially after the Cold War, not only big players, Latin America and the European Union are just in this pace. More and more developing countries are still want to join and want to cooperate with each other better. But as you said, the political process is not perfect because there's still a lot of topics that we need to talk further. So it just recalls my topic today, my experience in Brazil, because I think it's just about how we can balance the different patterns in such a process. So first of all, I want to share my experience in Brazil and want to hear from your insights. 3 years ago, I have led a student delegation to Brazil. And we have visited the city of Manaus. It's a capital city of the state Amazonas in the earthwest of Brazil. And then we spent 3 days there doing the field research in the virgin forest. Since that, I grew up in the northern part of China, so I think that the geographic environment seems completely different there. And the warm sunshine, clean air, broad rivers, biodiversity, and also very kind person impressed me a lot. And that experience firstly put me on the path toward looking deeply into sustainable issues. And here, there is a saying by the local people. They thought if Brazil disappeared from the face of the earth, that the rest of humanity would probably meet Amazon most. Although it's just a joke, but it stresses the crucial importance of the virgin jungles to the global environment, especially for the climate change. So as we all know, the Amazon represents over half of the planet's rainforest and comprises the largest and most biodiverse tract in the world. But however, the situation is on the rocks. This year's fires usually occur around the dry seasons, as slash and burn methods are used to clear the forest to make way for like agriculture, livestock, logging, and mining. Such activity is generally illegal, but enforcement of environmental protection can be lax. The increased rates of fire comes in 2019, more than 77% year-to-year increase for the same tracking period, like the international concern about the fate of the lawns. For example, maybe you have seen that French President Macron have written on Twitter that he ascribed this to Brazilian President Bolsonaro's pro-business policies that have weakened the environmental protections and have encouraged deforestation of the Amazon after he took office in 2019. Bolsonaro initially rejected international concerns to take actions, but he made some concessions after the increased pressure at G7 summit. So I think there is a long debate if the Amazon belongs to Brazil and other neighboring countries. It's a common heritage of all mankind. Besides, there is a still question: does Brazilian government have the final say to exploit the forests just on the benefits of their own? Surely, I think different people may have different definitions toward this question. Things is related to which side they stand. But from my point of view, the question cuts across traditional environment boundaries. And just like President Fischer has said, it's turning into a highly political issues. And it just happens just in Brazil. I think here lies in developing countries the same dilemma. I think China is also one member of this. And under the pressure of coronavirus pandemic, the situation may be worse. And the environmental issues, I think, respect no national boundaries, and no country is immune from it. But the politicians and scholars have their own countries and nations. So my question is, how do President Fischer view, how should we balance the tension between economic growth and the environmental protection, particularly in such areas in developing countries where the basic human needs may have not been met yet? So looking forward to your suggestions. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Jingjia, and also you touch on a very difficult political question, global commons versus sovereignty. And as you said, Amazon forest serves as the lung of the whole humanity. But of course, it belongs to the Brazilian territory. And so how we can find the right balance in the management of Amazon rainforest has been a very difficult issue, both environmentally and politically. So, President Fischer.
Well, Brazil is a special case because the president of Brazil is also a special person. There are many leaders worldwide who understand the necessity of taking care of our environment. But there are also still leaders who do not accept the fact that our environment is really in danger. For instance, in Europe, Czech Republic, our northern neighbor, had a president, Václav Klaus, who was just openly denying the existence of an environmental problem. He said that's an invention, that's not true, etc. And not to go into details, but to look at the problem as a whole. The question is, how does decision-making in our world, on our globe, function? Decision-making in our world is related to the opinion of the people. It is true that in one country, there can be a situation that there is a government, a ruler, a dictator who doesn't take care too much on the opinion of the people. But on the long term, in a long perspective, no leader can, so to say, resist to the general opinion in his population. And the fight for climate protection is a fight for the heads and the thinking and the opinion of millions and millions and even billions of people on our globe. And if I look at the development in the last 30 years, for instance, from 1990 or from 1980, 40 years to now, I see that from year to year, the change in public opinion in the direction of fighting against global warming is growing. I mentioned it shortly. There, in the 70s in Rome, a Club of Rome was founded, and they published books and articles and seminars, but it was a very, very small group. Other small groups came in addition. And from year to year, the feeling and the opinion that we need urgently to do something and to do a lot against devastations in our atmosphere, against global warming is growing. And a deciding step was the Paris Climate Agreement. A deciding step is the policy of China in questions of climate. I have a very positive impression. Nevertheless, that in Peking in the last weeks, the situation in the climate, in the atmosphere was a very difficult one and very warning us. But in general, we have a great global movement in the right direction. Young people in Sweden also started an action, Fridays for Future. And we will not win all countries, but we need to win a great majority of countries to develop and to work and to go in the right direction. And the question is, will we be fast enough? This I cannot give a final answer. But the development in the last years, let's say since the Paris Climate Agreement, for instance, is going in the right direction. Brazil is not on board. Several other countries are also not on board, but many are on board. And every one of us can make a little contribution. Majorities are the result of many individual decisions. 100 people cannot move much. 1,000 cannot move much. But if it grows beyond millions, then the pressure is existing. And this is the sense of democratic institutions to use enough pressure to go in the right direction. And I'm very, I will not live in 30 years, but I would give a lot if I could know how in 2050 we are discussing and what we have reached and what we have not reached. And if you are in politics, you have to be an optimist and you have to be convinced that we can manage it. And you have to be a part of the development in the right direction. This is very general, but it doesn't make sense to speak about state 1 and state 2 and state 3. I see a big development in the direction of climate protection, and I hope we are strong enough.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for your passionate plea, but also your commitment to work for the future generation for another 30 years. Thank you so much for your strong commitment. And thank Jing Jiai for your question. And now I'd like to invite Ms. Fayal Najada from Kuwait. She is heading an NGO to reduce inequalities. As President Fisher pointed out, growing inequalities are increasingly becoming the sources of many other problems we have: insecurity, injustice, and also intolerance. So I'd like to invite Fayal Najada from Kuwait to ask a question to President Fisher. Fayal, floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like to ask, normally when we discuss the topic of inclusion, especially SDG 10, or like youth, we don't discuss individuals with disabilities. And I've seen this in all over the world, not only in Kuwait. I would like to know what is the reason that, is it political or economic reason that we don't really normally discuss the individuals with disability, inclusion of the individuals with disability within a political system or within a whole system? In Kuwait, for example, where we're finding a difficulty to find data for disability. So we formed a group of researchers here in Kuwait, and I'm so proud to say that we're about to create a disability index. It's a long-term project. It's going to take 2 years, but I'm so excited for it. We got approved from. We're trying to combine the SDGs and the human rights laws, like the indicators of the human rights, and having this index specifically moving forward. First, we're going to start with Kuwait, and then it's going to be a GCC thing. I'm really excited to see the changes that this index is going to make within the region, because when we come into disability, we lack data. And for us as a group, we're trying to create our own database for disability inclusion within the disability in Kuwait. So even later on, if anyone kind of needed any data about disability within the region, we have it as an organ. It's not only my organization. It's a group. It's a organization that is called TGI, Training Gates International. And a part of it is also my group is going to be under that system. So I would like to say it's a great news. We got sponsored by a company that will pay. We received a grant after we proposed our proposal about creating this index. So we'll start moving forward with this index within the upcoming months.
Thank you, Nayal, for bringing up another important topic relating to people with disabilities. Of course, we have to address it as a human rights based issue. And also we have to do more to ensure equal access to the same services all other people are receiving to the people with disabilities. And I think we have to change our mindset first, how we look at the people with disabilities. I'm sure President Fisher has a lot to say about this problem. President Fisher?
Can I share one more thing?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So this was my speech in Vienna of like, it's called "Don't Diss My Ability, Believe in My Abilities and Capabilities Despite My Disabilities." And I was known for this quote, and my university shared it and shared my stories, my story of Ban Ki-moon and of creating the organization. I said, I envision a world where we accept each other despite our differences, and to see the strengths of individuals despite their differences. Like for me personally, I really believe in everyone has a capability. You cannot put limitation for people. So I really envision where we come into a world where we accept each other despite our differences, and to just enjoy and let it be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think a tolerance for differences is a critical element of global citizenship in the future. President Fisher.
Carefully what Mrs. Fayal, if I pronounced the name correctly, has just said about her activities and what you do in Kuwait. And this is a sector in public affairs, in politics, which was hidden behind the curtain for a long time. Disabilities were something you wanted to hide, not to touch, not to speak about it. And I'm happy to hear how directly you approach to this problem, and you report on activities in your country, in Kuwait. I personally, I observe and I admire how far the Scandinavian countries in Europe are on this field. If you need expertise, if you need examples, if you need statistics and figures and scientific reports, try to make a contact if you haven't done it already. But if you haven't done it already, if you have not done it already, try to study Sweden, Norway, Finland. They have a lot of activities, more than in Central Europe and much more than in Southern Europe, to make people with disabilities to feel accepted, to feel confident enough that they have the chances for a decent life, and that they are not discriminated, that they are not overlooked, etc. So this would be my answer and advice to you, and please continue in this direction as you have described it. It must be a really illustrious example in your world, in your country, to go in the direction as you described it. Monica, do you want to add something?
I just want to commend really for your work, because you exemplified that out of an idea that came from your perspective of what is a challenge. And I have to reiterate what I said before. You spotted there is no data on disability. And you said we need to get data done. And you sweetly said it's a long-term project, it's 2 years. what is 2 years? 2 years is very little in comparison to what you might achieve with this. And particularly your perspective, and I like the entrepreneurial kind of mindset that you have. This is the start in Kuwait, but we are already looking at GCC, so at the Gulf Cooperating Council countries. That is exactly the kind of action that we need more and more in all of the aspects. And to your question, why disability is not included into so many aspects of our SDG thinking, I commend that because it needs people like you who are a reminder to see disability as an ability rather than a disadvantage. And so move on with your work. Incredible how you want to scale it. Keep the ambition high and get more people on board because we need more with a mindset like yours.
Thank you, Monica, for adding your insights. And now I'd like to ask another panelist from China, Miss Liu Ji Jun. She is working at the Cultural Center for International Communication. And I think she is, of course, very much interested in the role of the cultural sector, cultural industry in the promotion of sustainable development goals. So floor is yours, Ms. Liu Ji Jun.
Thank you, Ambassador Kim. Good morning, Mr. President Fisher. Good afternoon, Ambassador Kim and Ms. Monica, and ladies and gentlemen. So first of all, I would like to thank all of our guests for their wonderful sharing. And I am Liu Ji Jun from CIPG Culture Center for International Communication. As the youth representative from one of the organizers for this forum, I really want to say it is a great honor for us young generations to have this great opportunity sitting here, learning your thoughts and experience on sustainable development and also some interesting issues like US-China relations. And first, I would like to introduce myself briefly. I am a local Beijinger and I've been spending 24 years together with this city. The only 1 year I was absent was 2019 when I went to Vancouver to obtain my double MA degree in SFU. I got my bachelor's and first MA degree in Communication University of China. My major was public relations for the undergraduate program and global communication for the master's degree. Only last year, I started my career upon graduation from school, so I am still a freshman at work. As I mentioned before, I am working with CIPG, CCIC, whose aim is to let more people worldwide know about Chinese stories and Chinese cultures. And it also aims at encouraging more connections and conversations between Chinese civilizations and those across the world. I always feel it is a great honor for me to get my first job at CIPG. Being a messenger for Chinese culture will always be my highlight moment in my life. And today I would like to share my thoughts on sustainable development, starting from a really short story of myself. I can still remember the exact time when I got the sense of this term. It was the time when I was 6 years old, when I entered my primary school. I still remember there was a very special place at school called the Earth Village. All the students were required to put all the garbage they made into this designated place. On the first day we entered school, our teacher told us that every student in the class should work together to keep the classroom clean. So every day after class, we clean the classroom in turn, and most importantly, we gathered all the garbage together and sent them to the Earth Village. I think this habit was formed and kept for 6 years until I graduated from my primary school. And it was by that time when the consciousness was formed in every kid's mind. That is, even though you are only a small child, you have to know and follow the rules of the world. Moreover, it is everyone's responsibility to protect the environment of the Earth Village. Also, this term educated every kid that the people on the earth should unite as one because we're all living in the same village. This short story is not the only story. There are a lot of this kind of stories in China. And in recent years, people are more and more aware of the importance of garbage classifications. And the term garbage classification even became a buzzword in 2019 on Chinese media. So that is very interesting. Also, another interesting buzzword that I want to share with you is definitely carbon neutrality, which is very popular these days. On March the 15th, instructions emphasizing the importance of realizing carbon neutrality was published, stating China will bring carbon peak and carbon offsetting into the overall layout of ecological civilization. This instruction covers industry, construction, transportation, and some other sectors, that is to control the use of high carbon energy fossil from the force in all aspects. Except the government, enterprises and the public have also been mobilized. We can see that in recent days, stocks related to the concept of carbon neutrality have been rocketing. So I think this move conveys the confidence and determination of China to reduce emission and save energy. We all know China has a really huge population. As long as the public can reach a new consensus on carbon neutrality and take actions, we will have full confidence in seeing new hope and achievements of energy efficiency in this country. All right, thank you for your attention. And right now, I would like to further share with you some of my questions. As we know, sustainable development is a composite concept which refers to the coordinated development of economy, society, resources, and environmental protection. In fact, nearly every country has experienced a bottleneck period of environmental governance and energy management. I know the Austrian government has strengthened the application of electric vehicles and photovoltaic energy and developed some specific policies to make the city cleaner. So, President Fisher, I'm wondering, is there any interesting story that you can share with us in this aspect? And my second question is related to the group of young people who is working in the cultural industry. How can we do more to contribute to sustainable development? Are there any examples from Austria or other European countries that you can show us on guiding the public to know more about this concept through cultural ways? So that's all for my presentation, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Liu Ji Jun, for your questions, 2 questions. What can be done to do more to mobilize the youth in environmental protection, and also the role of the cultural industry in promoting sustainable development goals. President Fisher.
Well, I thank you very much for this presentation. What China does in the field of carbon neutrality is of greatest significance, because China is such a great part of the world economy, and so many people are living in China that whatever China does in the positive sense or in the less positive sense has a great impact on the whole world. If you addressed Austria as such, in our country we have some big advantages, as for instance the fact that the area of wood in Austria is a relative very big one. The Alps are a central part of Austria, and the Alps with mountains, with wood, with glaciers, etc., help us to keep the atmosphere in this country relatively well. And we also have a lot of energy from water energy, from wind energy, from sun energy. We are not so much forced to use oil and coal, etc., that brings us also in a better situation. But nevertheless, we know that we are a part of Europe and a part of the whole world, and therefore the programs from the European Union as such are so important and so significant to come in the direction of carbon neutrality. I did not really understand the question about the contribution of culture, of cultural cooperation in this field. I mean, the cooperation between Austria and China in the field of culture and the cooperation of Europe with China in the field of culture is excellent, because you have a history dating back for 3,000 and more years, and the European history also dates back in, and we're working on the exhibition of the Austrian biggest cultural museum in Peking, in the forbidden city of China, and have an exchange back to Vienna. But please give me once more the content of question 2, cultural cooperation in connection with SDGs.
As I understand the question, I think she's interested to know that such an event, like organizing cultural events in promotion of sustainable development, for example, can contribute to maybe changing the mindset, or maybe injecting elements of global citizenship to ordinary citizens. So she wants, and I'm sure that Austria is rich of cultural heritages, and I think also Austria has a lot of things to contribute that way.
Well, I may concentrate on the fact that culture is a very wide notion, a very wide field. The classical culture in Austria, the Philharmonic Orchestra, the Salzburg Festival, are, so to say, independent from the question of SDGs and carbon neutrality. But culture is also what young people, young men and women, do to describe the world they hope to live in the future. Culture is what young writers, young painters, young filmmakers, young sculptors express as their hopes and their fears, etc. And in that sense, they can contribute a lot, because they are opinion leaders for the young generation. A young writer who writes a book and poems about the dangers against our environment, about the problems the society is confronted if we don't be sensitive to the future of our existence. This generation contributes a lot, because they are seen, they are listened, they are taken care of, or they are respected in their critique on our present society. They have a sensorium where the weak points in our society are, where we are not fair enough to the underprivileged, etc. In that sense, culture is contributing a lot to make us more sensible for the dangers we have to fight against, and for a decent future and a humane society, and even be provocative against the governing parties or the governing leadership in a country. So they are a very fruitful minority in the society, but warning us and making us more sensitive. That's what I can tell you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for sharing your wisdom. And next panelist, we have Ms. Dad Al-Kurdi from Saudi Arabia. And I think her question may be also related to the last panelist question, because as I understand, she's an entrepreneur hosting a weekly podcast to empower women to promote sustainable development goals. So Dad, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Wansu, Dr. Hans Fischer, and Monica. Actually, before I start with my question, to introduce myself briefly, I'm a fellow of the Ban Ki-moon Center, and I was motivated and inspired by the Ban Ki-moon to come up with my micro project, which is this Sustainable Saturday podcast. The reason me and my co-founder came up with this podcast is because we've realized that there isn't much knowledge about the SDGs in the kingdom in Saudi Arabia, sadly. Although we have 70% of youth, surprisingly, there isn't much awareness on the SDGs. So this is why we came up with the podcast and try to regularly through our episodes invite youth who are working towards the SDGs. And what's surprising is most of them don't know that they're promoting the SDGs or that they're working towards it. And this is where, the trick comes in our podcast, where we approach those youth and be like, no, you are contributing. What you're doing is great. And we would love to have you so that you can spread that awareness in the name of the SDG, of course, and also in the name of the business they're working in. So that's just to give a brief on my podcast. As for my questions and wondering, from the episodes and from meeting all these different people in the Ban Ki-moon through my podcast, I've realized, and especially with this global pandemic that's happening, a lot of promotion towards adopting digital means, the increase of the usage of the internet. Saudi Arabia has 70% of youth, and as you know, youth are the main users of the internet. There's something that I feel like hasn't been mentioned a lot in all these different seminars and discussions that are happening, is that although digital means are a good thing and a nice approach towards transformation of the whole world, it still does kind of contribute to these negative aspects of, let's say, isolation, not interacting physically, and this virtual reality that we're currently living. So I just would like to hear maybe from Dr. Hans Fischer and Wansu and maybe even Monica on how is that going to reflect, given that not just the Saudi population, many populations in the world have increasing rates of youth and, youth using these internet. What does it have an effect on the long term? That's what I would like to hear.
Thank you for the question about the positives and negatives of the digital era we are now living in. And President Fischer.
I think it's a phenomenon that is not new. The whole history of mankind is a history that step by step, a new generation grows up with new technical possibilities, and it would fill a whole book to describe how, let's say, in the time when in the 15th century the possibility to print book, and in the 16th centuries new technologies, and in the 17th century fundamental changes in the organization of agriculture, etc. Step by step, our society is making progress. On the other hand, there is no progress, really no progress, which isn't accompanied by disadvantages. In the 20th century or in the 19th century, industrialization, we could not exist without the progress in the field of industry in the 19th century, but it brings a lot of disadvantages, and it's always the challenge for the next generation to take the best out of progress and to avoid the negative aspects of process. The invention of television was a similar thing, for instance. It also exists to progress in chemistry, in the field of natural sciences, and the the digitalization gives us the possibility to sit next to or to see each other. 50 years ago, you wouldn't have the chance to see me in such a way, and also in Korea, and a gentleman from China. It's fantastic that this is possible, but at the same time, I'm unsafe if I see how my granddaughter with 10 years, 3-4 days an hour looks in her handy and in television, and I think she reads less books than I did, because digitalization puts her in a new environment, in a new situation. So in one sentence, it is the great task of humanity to make sure that progress takes place, and the negative aspects of each progress are reduced as good as we can. And in the last centuries, I think we managed that problem. And I hope that the present generation and the next generation will be able to take the fruits out of digitalization and of modern technologies and keep the disadvantages as low as possible. Why shouldn't it be possible in the next generation what in the past centuries more or less was successfully done? That's how I look at this basic problem.
Thank you, President Fischer, for sharing your wisdom. And as President Fischer just said, technological evolution always takes place. And our task is to stay pace with technological evolution, not to lag too behind the technological curve. And I'm sure the pace of technological evolution will become faster and faster, but also our efforts to stay at par with the technological evolution in terms of ethics and our values should stay at the same level. And with that, I think we have exhausted our panelists, and thank you so much for. We have Nesrin from Muslim Youth Austria. Sorry. And now floor is yours, Nesrin.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Dr. Fischer, for your remarks and input, and thank you, Monica, also for your input. My question would relate to that of in regards to that we've seen social media and the internet doing great things with mobilizing people, getting messages across, spreading information. But one thing that I've seen also in 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement that was also strongly promoted or spread across different social media platforms, and also the Fridays for Future movement that uses social media as a tool to get more people involved and get more people on the streets demonstrating, etc. But yeah, one thing I see is that those movements face the possibility of being somewhat of a trend instead of a sustainable movement, because what social media does is unfortunately, what I've seen is that oftentimes it stays on a very superficial level. And we've seen different movements come and go across social media. But what I find important, and what's also one of the SDGs, is climate action and sustainability that is not only a trend we see maybe for 2-3 years, but something that stays until there's actually a solution there. So my question would be to Dr. Fischer, but I would also be very interested in Monica's opinion. about how we can ensure that those movements are sustainable movements, also with the internet and social media in mind.
Thanks for the question, important question about the use of social media as a means, but also how we can make it more permanent. President Fisher.
Well, I believe personally, if a new invention is made, if society makes progress in whatever field, it's not a question whether you and I and Won Su and others want that it stays and want to make it a permanent achievement, a permanent. It depends how it is accepted in society. If you invent something which is not necessary, there is no demand, you can make propaganda and advertising as much as you can, and it will not help. If there is something new and invented which meets a demand of society, which needs something what people really want, then it can grow very fast and it can last very long. So don't overestimate the possibility to manage it, but concentrate whether it is something necessary, something which people need, which has a positive effort, then it will last longer. And it may also be that negative things who can be misused and which can be a disadvantage for society also meets a demand, and then you have to try to keep it under control. But as I said, if something is needed by the people, needed by a country, needed by a generation, then it will be last and be successful. That's my experience. Monica, what do you think?
I can only concur.
Monica?
Yes, I can only concur with that. I believe that we have to all be aware we are living in a time of revolution. And maybe some are not so sensitive about that, but the fact is we are in a digital revolution. And what is the currency of that digital revolution? It's data. Data is the currency of the future. And now when we are looking at data, the creators of data, the collectors of data, those that are able to utilize it at the best are, of course, those that program the algorithms, those that have the data storage centers, like nuclei that are existing worldwide who can process a lot of data. What we also know about data, and we have heard that from Fai, is that many segments are not yet at all accessible via data. And I'm here talking about Wikipedia just recently started a major effort to have more women included, for example, in their online encyclopedia. We know that data about youth and women is underrepresented in this current global currency that we have. So I think as much as the opportunity that the internet is bearing with it, because we have everything, every solution at the fingertip, we can click and have answers to almost all of our questions. That's amazing. And it allows us as humankind to generate hive thinking to the extent that we can tap into the best and the brightest everywhere. But on the other side, we also, of course, see that unfortunately humankind is replicating itself in all its nastiness on the digital space as well. And unfortunately, the representation of those that are marginalized is not ideal. So what should we work for? I think we should work for access of everyone to that kind of hive network. We should work for more gender representation in the data currency that currently is built and as we speak exponentially built. And we should make sure that marginalized voices of everyone are included in the development of digitalization. And I know that you, the young generation, you grew up as digital natives. I am somewhere probably in between digital nativity and sort of still analog thinking. But I do believe that the curve will be an exponential one with artificial intelligence, with all of the things that come along with it. And it will have to be up to us and the following generations to make the system fair. And again, let me draw back to the SDGs. Leaving no one behind gets a completely different connotation when we are looking at not only the analog world, but leaving no one behind in the digital world as well. So
thank you. As President Fischer said, social acceptance of any technological evolution should be the guiding light, and also ensuring access to all, removing the digital divide should be our ultimate goal. Without ensuring digital access for all, I think inequalities will only grow. And the problems, sustainability crisis we are facing will get only worse. So with that, now I'd like to invite Eric for your final words, maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
Thank you, Ambassador King. Thank you, President Fischer, and thank you, Monica. Thank you for all young fellows to give us the remarks and ideas today. I think SDG is a crucial topic that all young generation need to address and think about it. Now, in China itself, Generation Z, which is generation born after 1995, is 18% of the population. However, they generate about 30% of consumption in China. So it's a huge generation and it's a huge group impact the China's growth. I guess in many other highly populated countries, such as India, such as Brazil and other countries, the situation will be similar. So how we communicate with young generations and how to express our idea about sustainable development to young generations will be the task, I guess, not only for BKMC Center and Dewey Centre, but for all the international organizations, universities, institutions involved. So later on, after these months, we will discuss with BKMC Center and then to develop more programs for Generation Z and maybe even younger generation to better understand the initiative and to work together to promote green and sustainable Earth for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And before I ask President Fischer to give real final words, I want to summarize 2 takeaways I learned from his enlightening presentation today. The first takeaway is Sustainable Development Goals is meant as transformative agenda. And that agenda started in 2015, followed up in Paris on climate change, but still progress is being made, but is too slow. It's not fast enough, as he said. And this leads to my second takeaway lesson I took from his presentation is the role of the future generation. Because if the action continues to be slow and not fast enough, then you will face more serious problems. So if you want to make the future you want and make the world safer and more sustainable you live in, you have to act now. And with those 2 takeaways, now I'd like to invite back President Fischer for his last thoughts.
Well, I had the privilege of introducing the discussion with a 20 minutes lecture, so I can be, of course, very short now by thanking all those who have organized this discussion. My school time was a school time not only without social media, but even the first television set in the family of my parents came in when I was already visiting university. So you can imagine how big the change and the progress is in this period. And it's interesting for me to reflect it and to listen to young people, and a lot of things were mentioned, a lot of ideas were presented, a lot of questions were discussed, and I congratulate the Dewey University for that action. My old friend Won-Soo was helping us a lot through his guiding the discussion. Monica is always excellent, so I don't need to underline it. And the ladies who participated, I think that the men were a minority in the discussion, but that's good, that's fine. And I wish you well for the future, and I wish you many other discussions in such a global way between China and Kuwait and Austria and Korea, etc., etc. Thank you very much. Lots of success. Stay healthy. I get my second vaccination in 5 hours today in the afternoon, and have a lot of success for your activities and for your work. Thank you very much and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, President Fischer.
谢谢 in Chinese.
Thank you so much, President Fischer and everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fine.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.